devotees, and welcome to today's session. How are you doing? I pray that all is well with you and your families at this time. So today we on the 13th day. Today is Trayadasi, the 13th day. So we're on the 13th day of the Purushotam Maas challenge, and we almost just about halfway there. 2 days to go. So we've come a long way. And in terms of the Bhagavad Gita, we are on verse number 12 today. So there's only 20 verses in this chapter. So we have 8 more to go in this chapter with these verses. And they are very, very interesting because at the moment we've had a build-up of the first section, the banyan tree. I think we've gone over that thoroughly. And now the second section of the Jnani, Jnana Chakshus. He's trying to understand the Vedavit, the person who's trying to cut himself free from this material bondage through Jnana Chakshus, through using knowledge. And we can see the challenges that he's having. At the same time, we can see Prabhupada very skillfully and with great deep wisdom showing the comparative between Jnana and Bhakti. That devotion is not less than bhakti. Actually, by studying means jnana, but we're studying with the intention of devotion, and that makes a big difference. And if one has that kind of insight, then Prabhupada is giving the comparative between the jnana and the bhakti, between the jnani who is using jnana chakshus to free himself from this material world, and the devotee who is also using jnana but also using the method of devotional service, bhakti, to free himself from this material world. So we go on to the 12th verse today. So we Bhagavad Gita Chapter 15, text number 12. Yad aditya gatam tejo jagat bhasyate kilam yak chandramansi yak chagno tattejo vidimamakam. Translation: the splendor of the sun which dissipates the darkness of this whole world comes from me, and the splendor of the moon and the splendor of fire are also from me. So let's try to read over the translation carefully. So translation: the splendor of the sun which dissipates the darkness of this whole world comes from me. So we see this is also a repetition from the verse 15.5, where we're hearing Natad bhashate suryo nashashanko napavaka yatgatvam nanivartante tadhamam paramam mama. So Krishna was telling us that these same 3 features, the sun, the moon and fire. So there we are hearing Natad bhashate. Bhashate there was the sun. And there we were hearing Shashashanko. Shashi is the moon. And fire, pavakaha. So here he's using different words, but it's the same concept, that these are the three main features of life in this material world. The sun, the moon and fire. The sun in so many different ways. Scientists are now, in Ayurveda, it's described that there are 100,000 different kinds of sunlight, sun rays. 100,000. How many we know? Maybe 5, 6. We know sunshine, we know UV light. We know that the same light also creates photosynthesis in plants. We know that same light gives solar. We know the same light reflected on the moon gives a different effect. So the sun is heat and the moon is cooling. Shashi, the moon has a cooling effect. Yet this is all coming from the same source, the light that is coming from the spiritual world. So we see here Krishna, he's showing himself as Vishvambara or Vishnu, the maintainer. In Chaitanya Charitamrita, one of the names of Lord Chaitanya is Vishvambara, the supreme maintainer. And we know in Hinduism especially, Vishnu is the maintainer. So Krishna is showing himself here that this all comes from me. In chapter 10, verse 41, we also hear Krishna saying that all this Arjuna that I've described to you, yat yat vibhuti mat sarvam shrimat ujitam evava tat eva vagachatvam mama tejas amsa sambhava. This is just the spark of my splendor. All this that you see, the majesty and the glory of creation, this is all just a spark of my splendor, Arjun. Because he's unlimited. So how would you quantify something that's unlimited? How would you captivate it? You can't, because it's unlimited. But just to give you an example, he says, this is just the spark of my splendor. So Prabhupada goes on to say here, and the splendor of the moon and the splendor of fire are also from me. So Krishna is saying, I am maintaining all of this. Nityo nityanam, chetanas chetananam, ekho bahunam jo vitadadikaman. That both the soul and God, or the Supreme Lord, Purushotam, is nitya, eternal. And chetanas chetananam, and both are conscious, chetanas. But what's the difference between God and you? Ekho bahunam jo vitadadikaman. Ekho, one is maintaining the other. So this is Krishna in his form of maintaining and taking care. So if he's maintaining everyone and everything here, can you imagine what he'll do for his devotee? Special maintenance, special care, because it's his devotee. Because the relationship is based on love. So Prabhupada says here in the purport, the unintelligent cannot understand how things are taking place. So usually they want to figure out everything. This is a feature of Gyan, just like this person who is trying to figure out this world, the Gyani, and get out of this world by his intelligence to figure it out. Now he's using, Prabhupada would say, you're using your teeny brain to figure out this vast creation. That's not wise. Better consult with people that have wisdom. And surely there must be some wisdom, because we have questions. The fact that we have questions, there must be answers. The fact that we are trying to figure out and explore means there must be answers. So when we're looking at creation and you're looking at everything around us, so if we want answers to this, there must be literature, there must be books in history of humanity that can give answers to this. And there is books like the Bhagavad Gita. So Prabhupada immediately is saying it's not intelligent to think that all this is here and there's no information on this. There is information. Are you willing to accept it? Are you willing to understand it? Take the time to explore this wisdom. And you think about it, if humanity has kept the Bhagavad Gita intact for 5,000 years, we were talking about it here in this material world, how quickly information is changing. One moment you use it, you're a specialist, and 3-4 months down the line, you're not a specialist anymore. You need to study again. But this information humanity has kept for 5,000 years, the information of Bhagavad Gita. Just imagine how valuable this knowledge is. So don't take my word for it, go and read it and see why. But read it with a devotee who can explain it. Because again, if you just read it and say, no, I can't understand or I can understand, it's by your understanding. It's by your limited understanding. You need it to be explained to you. If you don't get it explained to you, it's just your level of realization that you'll understand. And if it's not a lot, you won't understand a lot. But if you hear it from the devotee, Sa eva maya te dya yoga prokta puratanaha bhaktosi me sakacheti rahasyam hyetaruttamam. Hey Arjuna, ye uttama rahasyam, the topmost secret, bhaktosi me sakacheti. You have to ask the devotee about this thing. It's not going to be from a university. It's not going to be for some exploration that you do. This is wisdom. This is not just knowledge. This is wisdom. So wisdom has to be shared with you. Prabhupada goes on to say, but one can begin to be established in knowledge by understanding what the Lord explains here. So Prabhupada first saying, yes, you unintelligent men, but also use your intelligence to know where to look. So therefore he's saying it can be understood. This can be understood as Krishna is explaining here. So on one side he's glorifying, he says, very good, you're understanding, you're inquisitive, but don't be foolish now to go look in the wrong places. Look in the proper place. And here Krishna himself is explaining his own creation. The creator is explaining his creation. So hear from him. Hear what he is saying. So Prabhupada goes on to say, everyone sees the sun, moon, fire, and electricity. One should simply try to understand that the splendor of the sun, the splendor of the moon, and the splendor of electricity or fire are coming from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So again, this is coming from the 5th verse. Yatad bhashate suryo nasashanko na pabaka yatkatvam na nivartante rattamam paramam mama. So Krishna is comparing and saying that these 3 elements of nature, fire, moon, and the sun, they are actually coming from me. We were describing this, that the sun and the moon are Krishna's both eyes. And we know it illuminates this whole creation. So not only it gives light, but we were saying it gives so many other rays of sunlight. The rays of the sun are in so many other dimensions of reality that it can nourish. Even the yogi was able to walk on the sun rays. So that's another feature of the sun that we don't know about. So we know about photosynthesis, we know about UV light, we know about how the sunlight is used to draw water up and create clouds. So there's so many features of the sun that is, humanity probably knows maximum 10 features. But Ayurveda says 100,000 ways the sun is influencing this planet. Recently also it was showing that whenever there's a flare, a sun flare, that on the planet of the sun, if there's an explosion, then it creates a flare. So geologists can see this when they study, astronomers, they can see this. And whenever that happens, then some catastrophe happens on the planet. So there's also some influence. And then the measurement of the sun, the diameter of the sun is 108 times the distance from the earth to the sun. So 108, how is that figure like that? And we know if the sun moved any further from the earth, we'll freeze. Any closer, we'll become a pakora. So all those things that are set in place like that, so life can exist. There must be some intelligence behind it. And whose intelligence? It's Krishna. And now he himself is speaking and telling that I've created all of this and this is how I've done to help you. So Prabhupada goes on to say, in such a conception of life, the beginning of Krishna consciousness, lies a great deal of advancement for the conditioned soul in this material world. So Prabhupada is saying here that this is the beginning. It's called, in philosophy of life, it's called pantheism. Pantheism is the study of nature, to see the divinity within nature. It's also, the technical term is also called deism. To be able to look at nature and see the divinity within nature. So Prabhupada is saying this is a higher level than the scientists. So, the traditional people in villages and in tribes and Aborigine people, they were mocked at because, oh, you're worshipping the sun, you're worshipping everything as God. You worship the sun, you're worshipping the water, you worship the stone, you worship everything as God. But Krishna is saying here, Prabhupada is saying here, this is the beginning of Krishna consciousness. Because you're understanding that without these things, I won't live. If something is giving you life, then surely it deserves your respect. People criticize Hinduism. Oh, you people worship everything. You worship trees, you worship stones, you worship the sun, you worship the water. But this is not worshipping, this is giving a respect to these things. Just like the tree, the Ashwata tree, the banyan tree we're reading about here, one of the features of this tree is that it gives oxygen 24 hours a day. The Ashwata tree gives oxygen 24 hours. So doesn't something like that deserve your respect? It's giving you life. Without oxygen, you can't live here. So it's giving you life. Doesn't it deserve your respect? We don't say we worship it as God, but it deserves your respect. It deserves your respect. Same with the sun. This is what we're hearing about. Without the sun, can you live? Without fire, can you cook? Without the moon, what flavor will be there in foods? So therefore, these things deserve our respect as Mama Teja Samsa Sambhava, as a spark of Krishna's splendor. So in this way, we also developing our smaranam. Yesterday we were talking about water, remembering the taste in water. Now we can see we're expanding it cosmically. We can see the sun and see the moon and see fire and say, yes, these are all Krishna's splendor. So you can remember Krishna during that. Prabhupada goes on to say, the living entities are essentially the parts and parcels of the Supreme Lord. And He is giving in here with the hint how they can come back to Godhead, back to home. So He's saying, connect everything to me first. Know that if you want to know where home is, first understand who is the Supreme Creator, who is the Supreme Lord. Understand who God is first, then understand who is Krishna. So now we're getting the feature of who is God, the Supreme Maintainer, the Supreme Controller. So Prabhupada goes on to say, from this verse we can understand that the sun is illuminating the whole universe. There are different universes and there are different suns, moons and planets also. But in each universe there is only one sun. So each universe has only one sun. So some universes are bigger, much, much bigger from what the scientists tell us than our own. So they probably have bigger suns. But each universe only has one sun. And we can see without the sun, life cannot exist. Because everything we produce as energy comes from the sun in some form of the other. Prabhupada goes on to say, as stated in Bhagavad Gita 10.21, the moon is one of the stars. Nakshatranam aham shashi. Sunlight is due to the spiritual effulgence in the spiritual sky of the Supreme Lord. So we can see Krishna is saying in 10th chapter Gita that out of all the nakshatras, the stars, I am the moon. So Prabhupada would use this sometime. He says, better to have one moon than many stars. Where does the sun get its light from? Well, the light of the sun is coming from the effulgence of the spiritual sky. It's coming from those spiritual planets that are self-illuminous. We read that. So now we know where the sunlight comes from and how the sun is able to produce this amount of light. So if one sun can illuminate this whole universe, and there's such a huge, big universe, and one sun can do this, and this is just coming from this reflection of the spiritual sky, then can you imagine that place? Prabhupada goes on to say, with the rise of the sun, the activities of human beings are set up. They set fire to prepare their foodstuff. They set fire to start their factories, etc. So many things are done with the help of fire. Therefore, sunrise, fire, and moonlight are so pleasing to the living entities. Without their help, no living entity can live. So, if one can understand that the light and the splendor of the sun, the moon, and fire are emanating from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then one's Krishna consciousness will begin. So Prabhupada is saying here, if you start to become aware of these things, then you probably can start your search, your God consciousness, and then which will culminate in Krishna consciousness. First, be aware that actually who is maintaining all of this. Everything we know in life works in homeostasis, in balance. So if there's balance, who is balancing it? There must be a mechanism that's balancing it. And if there is a mechanism that's balancing it and we can see that, then who created that mechanism? Because we know balance just doesn't occur on its own. Especially when they say this world was created from an explosion. How do you get balance within an explosion? You know, the Big Bang, everything got banged. Firstly, you have to ask who banged it, who made the Big Bang happen. And secondly, how is there balance after the bang? Like I was saying, we're certain distance from the sun. These measurements are there. Otherwise, we won't even have astrology. Astrology is based on the planets. Science and maths is based on all the measurements of the planets and things like that. So if that's not going to remain that way, how can you base science on it? So somebody is maintaining it that way. Who is that person? So gradually your questions start moving towards understanding God and appreciating material energy. So you see, the jnani doesn't do any of this. He just rejects it. But the devotee sees the divinity within it. And he appreciates this is all Krishna's splendor. Nothing to reject. Actually, it's sinful to reject something that God has created. As if, you understand everything about it. You're rejecting it on what basis? On your personal experience. Does that mean it's everything? No. So don't be so proud that you can easily just reject something as if you know what it is. Just like we were saying, fire. Example is given here of fire. So if I ask you, what is fire? All you'll be able to tell me is a description of it. Oh, it's something we use for cooking, it gives heat and light. All these are descriptions. What is it? What is fire? What is it? Tell me what it is. Don't describe it to me. Now you see, you don't know even what is fire anymore. So if you don't know, how do you reject something? This is why the devotee is not so proud to just reject this world. He understands this is a divinity is within this world. Otherwise, how it's working? So you respect that and you use that as a stepping stone to move towards Krishna. Prabhupada continues. By the moonshine, all the vegetables are nourished. So we were saying that as well, that the moon gives nourishment and juice, ras, taste to the vegetables. That's why each vegetable has its own taste. The sun is equal to all vegetables. The earth is equal to all vegetables. The water is watering all the soil, but yet we get different flavors coming out. How is that? This must be some arrangement, and this is Krishna. Prabhupada goes on to say, the moonshine is so pleasing that people can easily understand that they are living by the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. So after looking at all this and saying, wow, the sun gives heat, the moon is pleasing to the mind, and fire is used for cooking. Somebody has supplied all my needs here. Who is this? This person is so merciful to me. Who must this be? So your quest starts, your quest for enlightenment. So Prabhupada goes on to say here, without His mercy there cannot be the sun, without His mercy there cannot be the moon, and without His mercy there cannot be fire. And without the help of the sun, moon and fire, no one can live. So you can see you are only living by His mercy. So you see, gradually you start understanding. You become enlightened. This is a very good place to be. You are understanding that everything is by His mercy here. Prabhupada goes on to say, these are some thoughts to provoke Krishna consciousness in the conditioned soul. So eventually, by thinking like this, by analyzing like this, then you'll start to see, wow, there must be a supreme being. There must be a supreme maintainer who's taking care of all of this. And He's taking care of me. Who is He? So I hope you've learned something today. Please join us again tomorrow. Hare Krishna.